Let me tell you a story. It's the winter of 2024, so I'm 15 years old, and it's during my lunch period in school, and I am so bored. I'm not actually in the cafeteria at this time. I'm in this center in our library trying to help students out with tutoring. So we have this program at my school where students from the upper math classes can come and help out students from the lower math classes with their math homework and, helping them understand all these concepts. So I decide to go in and volunteer one of these days. So I walk in, I look around, and I find some people to help out. First few people, everything's going okay, they can understand. Then I get to one person, and as they're speaking, I lose all my focus because all my focus is drawn to the person sitting directly in front of them. And that person sitting directly in front of them isn't really working hard on studying math. They're not, watching a video on how to do these math concepts. They're not talking to a teacher. They have their math packet sitting in front of them on the table, and they have their water bottle on their desk, and they're using their water bottle as a phone stand. But again, instead of, educating themselves with some video courses, they have a Netflix show open. And at that point, I just got to this realization. I started to think, I don't believe that there's any inherent difference between us. All of us as human beings, I believe we are created equally. I believe that the differences in gaps of knowledge, who gets good grades and who doesn't, simply comes down to our ability and our choices when it comes to focusing on our work. So many people make the excuse of, oh, you're just smart, you're just born smart. But really, at the end of the day, when you look at all of these study habits, all of these people's and the way that they focus, it's just terrible. And so no wonder they're doing bad. And again, I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way throughout this video. I'm just trying to highlight the importance of focus because truly, the difference between you and the smart person, or the difference between you being the smart person and you being the best in your field, simply just comes down to your ability to focus on what you're doing, and specifically to focus on that work that you're doing in the present moment to make sure that you can deliver the highest quality work possible to make the world as good of a place as possible. And so today, I'm going to be teaching you exactly how you can optimize your brain, optimize your environments, and set yourself up for a proper flow state to improve your ability to focus during work. Now, step one is to optimize your environment. So since I'm a high school student, obviously one of the best times for me to work is while I'm at school, right? At that time, I don't really have control over the rest of my environment, and so it's the perfect time for me to just get all my work out of the way, and so then I can enjoy myself when I come home. And I keep this in mind throughout the day when I go to school. This is what I aim to do. I aim to get all of my work done and be maximally productive at school so that when I get home, I can enjoy myself, eat, spend time with my family, go for a long walk, that kind of thing, right? So I go to school, and there have been so many days where I'm sitting in class. I know I have work to do. I know exactly what I need to do, but I just don't do it. I can't focus. I pull out my computer and I start working, and then I just get distracted by a friend. There's this one app by the New York Times, like the New York Times games website with like Wordle and New York Times connections, all that kind of things. And so many of my friends are just playing that around me. And so I'll just look over and be like, helping them out with the games, and I'm not actually focusing on my work. I'm not focusing on what's actually important to me. And I realized that the biggest thing here was not my ability to focus in the moment, but rather it was my environment itself. If I was able to change my environment here, I would have done so much better, and I wouldn't have been distracted by these games or these apps or these distractions because I would just be focused in on my work. So what can you practically do to optimize your environment, to reduce distractions, and maximize your ability to do deep, focused work? Well, the first thing is to minimize all digital distractions. This is probably a fairly obvious one that you've heard before, so, turn your phone notifications off, all of them off, put your phone in airplane mode, put your phone in another room, and, stay on Do Not Disturb, all these kinds of things. Another thing you can do to minimize digital distractions is to close out any unnecessary tabs. I usually am the kind of person who, when I'm working, I'll have so many tabs open at once, and it really takes away from your ability to focus because when your workspace is cluttered, your mind is also cluttered, right? When you have these many tabs open, your brain is constantly shifting its attention between these things, even in a subtle way that you don't realize. Because it's there in front of you on that screen, your brain has the opportunity to then look at that thing and worry about that thing at that time when you're supposed to be working and focusing on something else. The second thing you can do to optimize your environment is to change your environment in specifically the social sense. So, one of the major distractions that I was experiencing in school was I had a bunch of friends around me. And of course, when you're picking seats and all, it's super cool to like hang out with your friends and sit next to them. But I realized it was such a distraction to me from my work. And so your friends are not going to suddenly expect you to be super focused in on your work. They're not going to know what you really desire unless you tell them up front. You need to go in and tell your friends, tell your parents, tell your siblings, hey, listen, I'm working on something really important. I need to focus right now. And we can definitely talk and socialize later, but right now, for this specific block of time, I need to focus. This is something that I used to struggle with a lot because I just felt a bit uncomfortable, a bit awkward telling my friends in class who I'm sitting right next to, hey, wait a second, I really want to focus right now. Let's talk later. I always thought I could, balance it, like work and then like make a joke next to my friend as well. But I realized the only way to really focus in on the kind of work that you're doing in school or in an environment where there are other people, the only way you can do that is if you tell them what you want. They will give you the most perfect environment to focus in because, again, they care about you. They will give you what you want as long as you ask for it. The big thing here is also to make sure that you are extra specific with your constraints and what you want. So, for example, I have a sister, right? A younger sister, and she really likes playing with me. And so I'll have so many days, like especially on the weekends, where I'll be working and she'll like come into my room and be like, hey, can we play together? Right? And it's cute and sweet and all, but like I'm trying to focus on my work. And so I used to just tell her, no, we'll play later, we'll play later. And then she would keep coming up and asking me the same question over and over and over. And I would just get more and more and more frustrated. And I didn't realize why. The reason why is because I wasn't giving her specifics. I didn't tell her, yeah, sure, we can play together at, 4 p.m. today. Or, yeah, sure, let me finish this one task. I'll be done in about an hour. She had no idea what to expect, and so she just kept on asking. You need to be the exact same way with the boundaries that you set with other people. You need to tell these people around you that, look, I'm not going to be available from this time to this time. I'm going to be focused on my work from this time to this time. You can do this at these times, but at this time, I want to be undisturbed, right? So figure out what time you want to work at each and every day and block off that time from other people. Tell the people around you, tell your friends in school, tell your family members what time you're working and what times you don't want to be disturbed. This is the way that you optimize your social environment. It's not by trying to escape or, just making excuses and saying, oh, I can't help it because, my parents, they always disturb me when I'm working. No, you just need to go up to them and tell them up front, look, this is the time that I need. This is what I need. Can you please help me with this? Okay, now let's talk about music. Music is a really controversial topic when it comes to focus. Some people swear by it, they're always listening to music when they're working. They've always got their headphones in, focused on their work, and they say that music really helps them to focus. Whereas other people, they believe that music is more of a distraction, that it doesn't actually help you to focus, and that it just serves as extra noise for your brain to focus on instead of actually focusing on the work. So here's the deal with music. Music is an incredibly powerful tool to motivate you and to get you excited, to give you that energy to work. However, it is also true that when you listen to music while working, it can serve as a distraction to your brain. And so the scientific literature on this is very clear. You want to listen to music in the middle of your breaks, as well as before you work, to give yourself that extra rush of energy and motivation. But when you're actually working, don't have music. If you're someone who listens to music really often, this can be hard to get used to, but the truth is, the feeling that you're seeking from music is just that high, that energy, that motivation, and you don't need to keep getting that same level of motivation while you're working. Once you get it pre-work, you can just carry that on while you're working. I always used to be so confused because some days, I would listen to my music and I would be super, super locked in. And it would feel so, so good to work with music. I would feel happy. I would be so fast with my work, especially when I was like writing and I was already in a flow state, which we'll talk about later, and I had my music in, it seemed like everything was effortless. But then when I started to listen to music for a little bit of a longer time, it started to feel so much more like a distraction. I was constantly switching the songs around in the playlist, skipping ads on Spotify, and, I would just get more absorbed in the music rather than the work itself. And this is precisely why. Music serves to motivate you and give you energy, but you can only be motivated so much. You can only get so much energy. And once you've gotten that level by listening to a couple songs before you work, at that point, music no longer serves any purpose that benefits you in your work. From there, music only serves as a distraction, extra noise for your brain to listen to, instead of just fully devoting its attention to your work. The last thing that you can do to practically optimize your environment while you're working in an environment that you can control is to make sure that you have everything you need before you sit down to work. I find that for myself and for many other people that I know, the biggest distraction is not so much the digital distractions or the people around us, because we've already kind of optimized for those things. For me, the biggest distraction is just having to, get resources and get assets, get materials that I don't already have. For example, just this morning, I went downstairs to go do my morning routine outside on the patio in the fresh air, and I went upstairs and back downstairs literally 3 times because each time I had forgotten something, right? I forgot my headphones to do like the meditation audio recording, and then I had forgotten my notebook, I had forgotten my pencil, my computer. I went up and downstairs literally 3 times before I could actually start my morning routine. This is exactly what happens to so many people when they're working. I have had so many times where I am not ready to work quite yet. I sort of get into the rush of working and I decide, yes, okay, I'm going to start working now. And I don't actually take the time before I work to prepare all the materials that I need. I'll randomly open up an extra tab and search something up that I could have just searched up before I worked. And guess what? That serves as a distraction. And then my focus is disrupted and I'm no longer able to focus on the task in the same way that I was supposed to in the first place. The same thing goes with physical assets like, grabbing supplies, grabbing a pencil, that kind of thing. Again, it all serves to disrupt your focus in the middle. And so the more that you can do before you start your work, the more things that you can get for yourself so that you don't have to disrupt your work, the better you will be able to focus. Now, what about when you can't control your environment? There are certain environments where you don't have much control over them and you try to optimize them as much as you can, but then you still aren't really able to focus. And for this, I have 2 tips for you. The first one is to use a combination of just putting in your headphones as well as white noise. So putting in your headphones, it immediately just changes the social dynamic. There's always more friction when you go up to talk to someone when they have headphones in, right? And so people are going to be that much less likely to disturb you while you're working. And the white noise serves to drown out any extra noise. So literally what I do in class, let's say, if people are talking around me and I'm really not able to focus, I'll put in my headphones. I will put my phone to max volume and I'll just blast white noise. And that way all the extra sound just gets muted out and I'm just listening to the white noise instead of getting distracted by this conversation and this conversation and this sound, right? So that's the first tip. Use a combination of headphones and white noise, and that will really help you to avoid those distractions in your environment that come from random conversations or sounds around you because you're drowning out that noise. And the second tip is to pick the right kind of work for your environment. Certain types of work are much easier in certain environments. For example, if you are in math class and everyone is talking about math, it's going to be that much harder to, do English or do history. Whereas if you're in math class and you're actually doing math, it's so much easier to focus on it because that is what you're hearing around you. Your environment is related to what you're actually doing. Likewise, I find that anything that I do with my work that involves words, so for example, reading a book or writing some text, anything that involves me managing language or words or anything like that, always gets significantly hindered if I have people speaking words around me. So this is especially relevant when I'm listening to music with lyrics and I'm also trying to read a book. Then the lyrics from the music get mixed up with the lyrics in the book, or the words in the book. And it's the exact same thing with like conversations around me while I'm trying to write. I'll get words from the conversations around me and I'll start writing those words instead of writing when I'm actually supposed to write. And so I find that if you're in an environment where you're exposed to a lot of words, try to do work that does not involve words. So for example, you could do math homework, or you could finish off that tedious work that doesn't really seem to require that much brain power, like copying and pasting data or uploading files. These things are so much easier to do when there are people around you compared to more physically and mentally demanding things that require use of language specifically, because the words around you get mixed in with the words from your work and you're not actually able to think clearly. So now that you've optimized your environment for optimal focus, the next step is to make sure your brain is properly set up for this focused work session. There's so many people out there who have the perfect environment to focus in. The room is quiet, they have no distractions, but when they sit down to work, they just can't seem to focus on it. And I've been in this exact same place. I learned how to optimize my environment from early on, but for some reason, I still struggled to focus. So now I'm going to teach you exactly how you can optimize your brain for optimal focus. So the first thing that you can do to improve your brain's ability to focus is a combination of two productivity techniques that I like to call ETFF. Okay, this is a combination of two pretty well-known classic standard productivity techniques, but I find that when I combine them, they both work extra well. So the first one is the ETF part of it, and that stands for Eat the Frog. Eat the frog is this classic productivity analogy where basically, imagine I invite you to a dinner, okay? So we're having dinner at my house and there's this big grand feast on the table. It looks delicious and you're ready to dig in. But then I say, you can't eat any of this food. And in fact, you can't even leave my house until you eat this frog. There's a big, gross, disgusting frog on your plate and you have to eat this whole, okay? Now I give you an option. You can either choose to eat this frog now before you eat your meal, or you can choose to eat your meal first and then eat the frog. Now the answer that you give to this question, you can just pause the video and think about it. Whatever answer you give to this question literally determines how well you're going to be doing in terms of productivity and focus. Now let's think about both scenarios. If you decide to have the frog after the meal, so then you're going to be sitting there eating the meal, eating all the food, but you're not actually going to be present and enjoying the food. All you can think about is that frog that's sitting there on that plate that you have to eat afterwards. And likewise, when it's time to actually go and eat the frog, you're left with this gross, disgusting taste in your mouth because you were just thinking about the frog the whole time, and now that you've actually eaten the frog, there's nothing left to cleanse your palate with after the meal. However, if you eat the frog first, so if you first, have that big, gross, disgusting frog, and then you eat the meal, well, then you just get it over with. You don't let that fear, that anxiety, that tension build up. And when you finally finish eating that live frog, you now have this wonderful, delicious meal to cleanse your palate afterwards, and you're no longer left with that bad taste in your mouth. And eat the frog is the exact principle that I want you to use when it comes to your work. So many of us delay the big, important tasks for later on in the day, and we focus on those sort of meaningless, tedious, easy tasks that are simple to knock out. But the truth is, we're just delaying eating the frog. What we really need to do is eat the frog. So whatever you do, first thing in the morning, wake up and get straight to work on your biggest, most grueling, most difficult task, because this is the task that will captivate your attention for the rest of the day. This is the task that you will think about constantly while you're on the phone with your friends, while you're eating a meal, while you're working on other meaningless tasks. This is the frog task. So each night before you go to bed, I want you to identify what your frog task is for the next day. You can choose to write it down or whatever, but identify clearly what exactly that frog task is. And then the next morning, before you do anything else, I'm talking literally before you brush your teeth, before you decide to even do your morning routine, if you want to maximize your productivity, this is the way you do it. Literally before you do anything else, you sit down and you just bang out that one task. You get it done, and then from there you can continue with your morning, eat breakfast, brush your teeth, all that kind of thing. And then from there you can do those easier tasks. When you get that frog task done at the beginning of the day, it becomes so much easier to carry on with the rest of your day because you're not left thinking about this big frog task. You got it over with in the beginning. And the second part of ETFF is that final F. That F stands for fasted. So that means that whatever deep work that you're doing, whatever frog task that you're nailing at the beginning of the day, you want to do that fasted. There's something incredibly powerful about working fasted. Even if you just delay your breakfast or your first meal by a couple hours, that little sacred golden window of time that you get before you eat your first meal is genuinely magical in terms of productivity. It surprises me so much each time I eat a meal and then sit down to record a video or to work or to write a book, whatever. It's always like my mind is just slower. Like instead of swimming through water, I'm like swimming through thick honey, right? I'm not actually able to focus, and everything just seems to have that much more friction. Because think about it this way. When you're fasted, your body has no energy to divert to digestion or to resting, relaxing, recovering, using those nutrients. It's all just being used to focus on what you're doing. But then afterwards, literally this has been biologically proven, you start to activate your parasympathetic nervous system more, which means you get into this more relaxed, slow, laid back, chill kind of state instead of that sort of sharp, alert kind of state that you want to be when you're actually working. And at the same time, you're diverting all these resources, all this blood flow and everything to digesting the food instead of actually focusing on your work. I find that somehow, psychologically, biologically, whatever, I find that I am so much more efficient when working and so much less likely to zone out and lose focus when I am fasted. And aside from these biological reasons, we can also just think about this from a psychological lens, right? Traditionally, in the caveman days, our work, right? Now we work on, recording videos or writing a book or whatever, right? Doing homework. Our work used to be hunting for food. And so we can imagine that if we had just eaten a massive meal, we wouldn't be very motivated to go out and hunt for food because our stomachs were already full. And I believe that this exact same principle applies to modern day productivity. Because we are full when we work, we no longer have that same sense of drive, that same sense of literal hunger to go out and achieve what we want to achieve, because internally we are already satisfied. You don't actually have to work to fill up your stomach, and so you don't feel that same level of motivation, that same level of drive to actually go out and get the work done. Now, when you start this technique of intermittent fasting in the morning while you do your deepest, hardest work, you might feel hungry for the first few days because you're not used to eating at such a later time. But you'll find that your hunger signals naturally readjust to eating at this later time. And this is just a side point, but I think this is probably the healthier way to eat. We as humans probably aren't biologically adapted to waking and eating first thing in the morning, right? We're used to waking up, working for our food, spending all day hunting, and then we finally get our kill and eat our meal. So that's just a side point, but basically, your hunger signals will readjust, and I get it. At the beginning, it can be so distracting when you're sitting there and you're constantly hungry and you're just like, I don't want to work, I just want to eat, right? Those hunger signals will readjust if you just give them like about a week. And then from there, you're going to have that level of mental clarity that we talked about without the distraction of hunger. And this productivity technique is extremely powerful. I used to use it when I was doing a dropshipping business. I think this was in the summer of 2023. So I was doing a little drop shipping business with my friend, and I would hop on my computer every morning at 5 a.m. Okay, that was, I was sleep deprived and everything, but that's a side point. I would hop on my computer every morning at 5 a.m. I wouldn't eat anything until about 10, and I would just sit there and work on the business for 5 whole hours. And it was so nice because I had this beautiful little undisturbed time where I was just able to lock in with no disruptions. No one's awake to text me or call me. None of my parents are awake to ask me questions. I just had this beautiful, quiet little time to do my Eat the Frog task and to do it fasted. Now, another incredibly powerful tactic that you can use to optimize your brain's focus and gain more energy, gain more alertness when you work is through cold exposure. I used to take a cold shower every day for literally like 3 to 4 months in a row before stopping. And I loved it. I genuinely loved every single day of it. Sure, it's hard when you step in the cold shower and the first few seconds are cold, but I promise you the feeling that you get after, it's so good. You get this rush of natural endorphins like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine, and you just feel amazing. When you sit down to work, I promise you, you are going to be so awake and alert. I've had coffee before, and by the way, I have an incredibly low caffeine tolerance, and I'm telling you that level of high, that level of energy, that level of focus that I get from taking a cold shower is 10 times better than any sort of energy or rush or boost that I've felt from caffeine. I genuinely feel like an enhanced, like superhuman when I sit down to work after taking a cold shower. Now, these other tactics, they work to, reduce brain fog and all, but specifically with the cold shower, I find it's not as much of reducing friction or reducing brain fog, and it's really more of energizing yourself. I've found multiple times that, especially towards the end of the day, when my body's a bit warmer and everything, that especially after eating a meal, by the way, I find that, again, I just lack that sense of energy. I sit down at the computer and I'm lethargic, I'm a bit slow, I'm lazy. But again, that cold shower, it just puts you right in the mood of being sharp, of being alert, and being energetic. Now, I understand that cold exposure isn't very comfortable for many people, right? Of course, we all don't like cold exposure. Number one, it's a great way to build discipline. But number two, even if you don't like cold exposure, I still highly recommend trying this out. The thing is, you don't need to get a whole ice bath and sit in there for 30 minutes. In fact, you don't even need to do a shower for 1 minute. You can literally just turn on the shower each morning right before you do your Eat the Frog work and literally turn it on all the way cold. Stand in there for 2 to 3 seconds. That's all you need. Just to get that little shock where you gasp for air and you're just your body is shocked. That's all you need. I found that the difference between that and, I've done 5 to 7 minute cold showers before. I find that the difference between those two is very minimal in terms of that energy and that high that I get after. It feels almost the exact same because I think that release of natural endorphins primarily depends on that shocked feeling that our body receives. So far we know that you should be waking up, hopping in the cold shower straight away, shocking yourself for a couple seconds, and then getting straight to work on your deepest, most grueling task while being fasted. That is optimal for productivity. But now, let's talk about what time you should do this, because there's this big debate around whether you should wake up early and, get straight to work in this uninterrupted window of silence where no one can disturb you, or whether you should sleep in a little bit more, wake up later, and have that extra benefit of being well slept. Now, I've done both things in many occasions, and I want to share two stories with you. So I'm a high school student, and in my school, there's a club called DECA. It's like a big business club where you go into competition, you take tests, and you do these speaking performances, all that kind of stuff, right? So I was studying for these multiple choice exams, and it was the last 2 weeks before nationals. There was a big database of these long exams, 100 question exams that took 60 minutes each on the internet, these PDFs, right? So I decided the best way for me to study is to just go through a ridiculous volume of these PDFs. They had from now all the way back until 2011 or 2010, I think. So I just decided to do all of those PDFs and then just keep doing them on repeat. And I thought the best, most efficient way for me to do this would be to wake up early before school and just have that uninterrupted silence, that golden time where I'm fasted and I can just eat the frog, get straight to work. So I wake up and I get straight to work. I wake up at 4 a.m. for 2 weeks straight. I'm not taking weekends off. I'm not doing any of that. Every single day for 4 a.m., I wake up, I set my alarm, and when I get out of bed, the first thing I do, I just sit down at my computer and I grind out these cluster exams. That's what they're called, by the way, cluster exams. So I improved tremendously through this, right? The average thing is like 100 questions in 60 minutes. But when I kept practicing this, and by the way, my accuracy was around like 80%, 85%. When I practiced like this, where I woke up at 4 a.m. and I just worked so hard every single day, just putting in the reps, putting in the volume, I got from 100 questions in 60 minutes with about 80 to 85% accuracy to 100 questions in 20 minutes with 95% accuracy. At that level, we were able to make school history and nationals. So it was very clearly worth it, those efforts that I put in. And of course, I had a partner and he definitely put in more work as well. But in terms of my own development as a competitor, this played a crucial role for me. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2025 when I'm first writing my book. By the way, check it out, top link in the description. So I'm writing this book and I'm getting these ideas. I'm literally spending all day on my computer just writing, getting ideas, thinking through things. How should I word this? How should I word that? And again, I think back to those days where I woke up early during my dropshipping days. I woke up early to do DECA practice cluster exams. And so I decide, okay, I'm going to wake up early and just work on my book. And the night before I was doing this, I had this big level of confusion and just this hesitation. I didn't know whether to actually do it or not, because part of me was thinking, oh no, I'll be sleep deprived. Part of me was thinking that, it would be good and productive. I'd get that quiet, uninterrupted time. And so I literally got up out of bed. I was laying in bed with my 5 a.m. alarm. I got up out of bed, turned the alarm off, went back to bed. And then I'm sleeping, I'm dozing off, and then I'm like, no, this isn't right. So I get up again, go back to my phone. My phone, I keep it in the other room, by the way. So I'm literally getting up, putting my clothes on, going back to the other room, grabbing my phone, and then turning the alarm back on. And then I put it down again, finally go back to my room. And I remember having this conversation with my parents earlier about like, oh, should I wake up tomorrow early or not? And this was like around 2 weeks before I had this big summer program where I was going to be traveling, going to stay at a university to like get that sort of experience. And I was like thinking, okay, you know what? I'll get to sleep during that university experience, or maybe I won't. But either way, I want to lock in on productivity right now, right? So I have this big debate the night before. Then I wake up that morning at 5 a.m. I feel super tired, but it's okay, right? I wake myself up. I sit down to work. I get out, about like 3,000 words, like a little bit of writing. And then I'm like brainstorming, right? My mind just stops. So I get up out of my chair. I'm starting to walk around the room, literally taking laps. And I'm just brainstorming, thinking, okay, what do I write next? What do I write next? And then I decide, okay, let me just like sit down on my bed, right? So I sit down on my bed. The window is open, by the way. This beautiful sunlight is pouring in through the window. And I'm just thinking, okay, what do I write next from here? What are some ideas that I can, take this to the next level? And then sitting on the bed turns into lying down on the bed. And then I find myself asleep for the next 30 minutes. At that point, when I woke up, I just decided to give up on that productivity for that day. I was so sleep deprived that I just could not focus. So I got out of bed and I just went on with a fairly unproductive day that day. So here we can see both sides of the story. On one time, I was super productive when I woke up early, but at another time, when I woke up early, I just got tired and lethargic and I wasn't actually able to focus on my work. So when should you wake up early? In what cases is it best? Well, I think if you have flexibility over your schedule and if you have control over your environment, it is best to sleep in and get a full night's rest. This is the ideal scenario. This is the perfect balance because you have this uninterrupted environment with no digital distractions, with no people in your house, disrupting you, and you also have control over your schedule. So there's no need to, go to school earlier, go to work early. You can sleep in, get that full, 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep, wake up feeling refreshed and ready to go. Now, what if you're the other kind of person who doesn't really have much control over their schedule, their environment? Maybe you go to school, maybe you go to work, maybe you live in a fairly disruptive environment with a bunch of digital distractions around you, and you're not really able to have that quiet and focused time to yourself. Well, in this case, I would actually say you can take the L with your sleep and wake up early to get that work done, because an environment and having that quiet, undisturbed peace is much more conducive to good productivity than simply being well slept. Of course, it's ideal to have both. But in the cases where we can't have both, I would rather you have a couple hours to yourself with beautiful, undisturbed peace where you can sit down. It's completely quiet. There's no digital distractions around you. There's no rushing to go to school. You have this time in the morning before you go to school, before you go to work, where you can just sit there and work on whatever actually means the most to you, rather than sleeping in, going straight to school or work, coming back after a long, tiring day of school or work, and then you sit down, you're tired, you're lethargic, you're not even fasted anymore. You've already done this, this crazy amount of extra work, this tedious, mind-numbing work, so that when you sit down to actually do what matters to you, you're not actually at your full capacity to focus, because your mental energy has just been so drained by this point. We want to wake up feeling fresh with the most amount of mental energy possible, so we can use that on our Eat the Frog task. If you can do this with a perfect sleep schedule, where you wake up and sleep just according to however you feel like, that is ideal. There's literally no purpose in waking up early to, work hard or 5 a.m. grind or whatever, when you're just sleep depriving yourself and you still get the exact same thing either way. But in the cases where you don't get that undisturbed time, when you don't get that level of peace and quiet, when you don't get that extra hour or two of time to work before you go to school or work on your natural sleep schedule, because let's say it starts too early, in that case, I would say take the L with your sleep schedule, set your alarm earlier, and give yourself those couple hours when your mind is the freshest. Your work is going to be so much better, because instead of coming back home after being already tired from the day, you go at your work when your mind is the freshest. Now, another thing that you can do to optimize your brain for peak performance is to start meditating regularly. Presence is the skill of bringing your attention back to the present moment over and over and over again, and eventually being able to sustain that level of focus throughout the day. And we need presence when we are working hard. We need to make sure we can stay focused on that particular task. Our mind will inevitably drift to other things. We'll start thinking about past memories, what we did yesterday, what are we going to eat for dinner today? These are all normal thoughts that come in our mind. The important thing is that we are able to refocus on the work that we're doing. And meditation is the most direct way to train this skill. Meditation is where you sit down, you close your eyes, and you just start focusing on your breath. Now, just like with work, you will inevitably become distracted. You'll start getting these random thoughts, these random memories. You might feel worried or anxious about the future. That's all completely okay. As soon as you realize that you're being distracted, as soon as you realize that your thoughts are away from the breath, all you have to do is just redirect your thoughts back to the breath. You go from focusing on these random ideas to focusing back on the breath. And you just keep doing that over and over and over. Again, you'll get distracted. You realize you're distracted, back to the breath. Get distracted, realize you're distracted, back to the breath. Meditation is just putting in the reps for your brain over and over and over, like bicep curls in the gym. And each time that you do one of these focus cycles, each time you return your attention to the breath, you strengthen your level of focus. You're able to focus on the breath and stay focused for just a little bit longer each time. And sure, your focus muscle tires out. That's completely fine. But overall, in the long term, you end up building greater focus. And the same thing goes with being distracted. you will find that the amount of time for which you are distracted, so the difference between when you first become distracted and when you realize you're distracted and then bring your attention back to the breath, also becomes a shorter interval of time. So you spend more time being focused and you have less time before you're able to realize that you're distracted and bring your attention back to the breath. Meditation is the single most direct way that you can train this focus skill, because focusing on the breath is so boring, right? It's so easy to get distracted from focusing on the breath compared to watching your favorite TV show, right? If I sat you in front of the TV and asked you to watch your favorite TV show, it would have probably taken you 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before you zone out a little bit, lose focus, and then you bring your attention back to the TV show. But with meditation, this happens literally, it could happen every 2 seconds. It could happen every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, maybe every few minutes once you get more advanced. So with meditation, because these cycles are more often, you are able to train your focus in the most direct and most effective way, because you're able to amass such great amounts of volume in this meditation skill. Now, the final thing that you can do to optimize your brain for peak performance is visual field restriction. So when I was a kid, I used to watch this TV show called Just in Time, where there would be the characters and they would go through all these, historical scenarios, these hypothetical scenarios in a bunch of different places around the world to try to solve problems and face challenges. And one of the episodes, they had a horse, okay? So they were helping this horse racer with his horse, because his horse was this big, wild, rowdy horse, and it was incredibly fast, but it would never run in the direction that it had to, right? It would always just be galloping all around the place, and it would never have a clear direction. And so they try to figure out all these ways to make the horse run in a straight line, and then they realize it's because the horse is always looking around. So what they do is they place this kind of cone over the horse's head so it can only see in front of it. And that way, it never looks around behind it, it just looks straight in front. And at the end of the episode, they end up winning the race with this horse because it's so fast, it just needed to focus. And I realized the mind is the exact same way. When you widen your visual field, so if you've ever been hiking and see these vast horizons, or, look over a vast ocean, if you see big things like nature, like hiking, these kinds of things, you'll start to think bigger thoughts. You won't really focus as much on the present moment. You'll start getting these larger thoughts and ideas of the past, the present, the future, what it means to be alive, these like deeper questions, right? And that's great in those scenarios. But when we are in the moment and when we're actually trying to focus, what we want is the exact opposite. We want to narrow our visual field. We want to restrict our visual field so that our focus is pinpointed on just one thing. Just like the horse in the cartoon, sure, it can be nice to have this freedom to look around, but again, we want to maximize our focus. We want the horse to run in a straight line, just like our brain. So we restrict our visual field as much as possible so that the only thing our mind focuses on is that work that is in front of us. Now, you can do this through a couple of ways. First of all, make sure you have a very clean environment. Don't have a cluttered or messy desk. People say this as like a pretty classic productivity technique, but no one really explains why it works. I think this can actually change how you work entirely, because number one, you're not distracted, you're not looking around, fiddling with things on your desk. It's super clean and minimalistic. And second, it just kind of sets this intention of like, I'm a different person now. I have this clean workspace and I want to have a clean mind when I go into my work. I just want to be focused on whatever I'm doing. Now, that's the first thing you can do. The second thing is just stop looking around the room all the time. Look directly in front of you. And let's say, you do need to think about something. Let's say you do need to take a break. Still look at whatever you're doing. Even if you do need to like pause and maybe think about what to write next or what to do next, still look at your computer monitor, look at whatever you're doing, look at the paper you're writing on, and keep your visual field focused in on that. Because the moment your visual field shifts away, for some reason, your mental focus also just seems to shift away. And it's so much harder to bring your mental focus back onto the task once your visual field has already shifted. And neuroscience has already proven this. It's very clear in the scientific literature that restricting your visual field can actually have scientifically proven benefits on your level of focus and your engagement with the task. So it's very clear from all perspectives, from psychology, from the science itself, that you should try to restrict your visual field as much as possible when working. So try to be a little bit creative, brainstorm some ideas of how you can restrict your visual field during working. I think that it honestly could be that little thing that keeps getting you distracted. And I think the biggest thing here is just to be intentional with it. It's not so much about, changing the environment or changing what's around you. I think really when you sit down to work, the biggest thing is just to be intentional with where you direct your focus. Don't, randomly stare around the room. Look at wherever you need to look at and keep your glare pinpointed right there. Don't shift your gaze from the computer monitor. Literally just stare at it. Even if there's nothing going through your brain, don't have that temptation. Don't listen to that temptation to look around the room and let your eyes wander. Just keep staring at whatever you're doing. Even if nothing comes, at least this way, it's going to be so much easier for you to re-enter that focused state once you're ready to go again. So now that you've optimized your environment for peak focus and you've improved your brain's performance so you're able to focus on the work at any time of the day, at any environment, the next step is setting up your work and your work habits to reach a flow state. So what exactly is flow? I've been seeing a lot of memes on social media about, I enter flow state, but what exactly is this state? Because it is a real scientific term. Now, flow state is this area of peak focus, of peak concentration, of peak presence, and being in touch, being in connection with the present moment so fully that any thoughts that you have in your mind, any ideas, any distractions just completely disappear and you basically dissolve into the task. It's a wonderful feeling, and it's that same thing that athletes call being in the zone. When let's say a basketball athlete, they're scoring a bunch of points, and then later on in the interview they always say, I was in the zone at that time. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about entering a flow state. And flow states go beyond just reaching your peak performance. There was a study on human happiness done by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Sorry, I definitely mispronounced it, but basically he did a study on human happiness. So he put pagers, these little almost like phone-like devices, on a bunch of people who, they're going to work, they're a variety of ages, from young people to elderly people, and they're just normal adults living their lives, going through work, etc. And he had these pagers, or these little phone type devices, buzz at certain points throughout the day. And he did this with, I think, 255 participants. So he put pagers on all of these people. He had these pagers buzz throughout the day. And when they buzzed, these participants would be prompted to answer two questions. Number one, what are you doing right now? And number two, how happy do you feel? So, after gathering all this data, and again, it is correlative data, so we can't make any, causation statements, but the data was pretty clear that being present correlates with extremely high levels of happiness. Those people who experienced more moments of peak presence, so for example, being deeply engaged in their work, having a proper, important conversation with a loved one, moments of intimacy, these kinds of things insanely increase their levels of happiness, even though, we don't see work as a normally pleasurable thing. We want leisure time. We want that time to relax and, enjoy ourselves. But actually, they found that those same people, when they had that free time, when they had that time to spend to themselves, their mind was so much more likely to wander, and they were so much less likely to get into a flow state, so they actually felt less happy. And so, if presence correlates with happiness, then it only makes sense that a flow state is the peak level of human happiness that you can achieve. And if you've ever been in a flow state, which I'm sure you have multiple times before, maybe without even noticing it, again, it's that sensation where you're doing something and your thoughts just kind of disappear. You become so absorbed in the task that you lose sight of the world around you. I guarantee you that is the state where you are going to be your most productive, and it's also probably the state where you are your happiest. Even though you're not thinking these conscious happy thoughts, even though you're not, visibly laughing or smiling, you have this sense of bliss, this sense of peace within your brain, because your mind and your body are united in completing this task. So, how do you actually get into this coveted flow state? Now, I want you to think of an analogy. Imagine yourself as a plane, like a literal airplane, okay? Now, how does an airplane get into the air? Well, it doesn't just, suddenly flap its wings and start going in the air. It warms up its engine, right? There's the pilot inside and everything, and they go on a runway. They have this period where the plane is slowly gaining speed on the runway, getting faster and faster and faster until it can take off and enter the sky. I want you to think about your efforts into entering into flow as the exact same thing. You are like a plane on the runway, and your goal, just like a plane, is to take off into a state of flow. But the only way you can do that is to give yourself uninterrupted runway time. And so the first thing that you can do to improve your ability to enter a flow state consistently is to not interrupt your runway time. You don't want to be like the plane who gains speed and then suddenly stops and, I have to reset at the beginning of the runway, because that's what you're doing every time you distract yourself while you're in the middle of work. Every time you get up for a quick break. I know these things can seem harmless, they can seem benign, but the truth is these are interrupting your runway time. And so every single time you make one of these minor adjustments, you have to keep going back to the beginning of the runway and start all over again. So don't interrupt your runway time. If you're not already in a flow state, your goal should be to build up as much momentum as possible so that you, like a plane, can actually take off into the flow state. So this means, number one, avoiding all distractions like we talked about earlier. Number two, don't constantly switch your tasks around. Don't be working on one thing and then randomly switch to another task. Multitasking is out of the question. You don't want to be flying two planes at once, right? That doesn't make sense. Just focus on that one task that you're doing right now and give your undivided attention to it, because that is the only way you will build up enough momentum to get into a flow state. So again, remove distractions, don't multitask, don't even think about other ideas. If you do have thoughts of other ideas, what you can do is this simple little tactic called using a sticky note. Now, I actually didn't really think about sticky notes very much earlier, but one of my teachers one day, I had asked her for something, and she was in the middle of teaching a lesson. So she just quickly jotted it down on a sticky note and just put it on her monitor. And I was thinking, like, wait, I always see teachers using sticky notes. Like, why do they all use sticky notes? So I thought about it a little bit more, and then I realized it's because they don't want to interrupt the flow that they're in. They've already entered this state of flow, or they're trying to get to their way into a state of flow when they're teaching a lesson, and they don't want to interrupt that, which is why they'll quickly jot down a sticky note, tape it up to their monitor or put it on their desk so that they don't have to worry about that thing anymore. The moment you write it down on paper, and this applies to, journaling, emotions, anything, the moment you write something down on paper, you no longer have to carry it in your mind. And so if you find yourself constantly getting distracted, oh yeah, I have to do this thing. Oh yeah, I have to take out the trash. Oh yeah, I have to feed the cat. Oh yeah, I have to do this other work task after this. Oh yeah, I have to pay this person. Anything, any ideas that you have, just jot down a sticky note while you're working and get immediately back to work. Because I understand it can be so tempting to immediately leave whatever you're doing and quickly go do that thing because it's urgent and it's important, and oh no, what if I forget? You will not forget if you have the sticky note. And you will also not sacrifice your ability to concentrate on the current task if you use the sticky note, because you're not really interrupting your work. You're more so just leaving a reminder for yourself in the future. So if you ever find yourself being interrupted by thoughts of doing something else, jot down a sticky note and get to it later. Do not interrupt your work in the moment. That will only make things worse, and you're going to have to keep resetting yourself on the runway instead of actually taking off into flow. And if you really want to take this tactic to the next level, one thing that you can do is to start making a to-do list of your next day the night before. This way, you don't even need to worry about the sticky notes, because any ideas that you had for work have already been thought out the night before. And so that morning, when you wake up and you do your Eat the Frog task and you spend the rest of your day working, you can literally just turn your brain off and focus on the work instead of thinking about what you actually need to do. Because again, you already planned that all out that last night. Now all you need to do is actually do the work instead of thinking about what you need to do. So I used to have this problem all the time where I would be applying to internships and doing, practice tests or anything like this. And I would randomly get this idea, oh yeah, I need to research this one thing, or oh yeah, I need to learn about this thing, and oh yeah, this thing, I need to do this chore. And I would just get up out of my seat so many times. I would randomly open up a new tab, search something up on YouTube, and then spend the next 30 to 60 minutes watching YouTube videos on a topic that sure was necessary, did need to learn about, but I could have waited for later. And so if you structure this beforehand by making a to-do list the night before, it just makes things that much easier because again, when you make that to-do list, not only have you separated all the tasks so you no longer have to think while you're actually working, but you can also then prioritize the tasks. You can set your eat the frog task the night before so that when you wake up, you have absolute clarity knowing exactly what you have to do. And then from there, you can also schedule the rest of your workday because you know exactly what you're going to do the next day. Now, another way that you can improve your ability to enter as well as maintain a flow state is by tracking your progress while you work. For example, with an athlete, he has the scoreboard where he can see how many points he scored. For a writer, he can see the word count on his page. These ways allow you to track how much progress you're making in the work session itself. And let me just explain real quick why this is so important. One of the most important components of flow state is the balance between skill and challenge. If you have an unbalanced matchup between skill and challenge, you're going to find it much more difficult to enter flow. Flow is this perfect little golden zone where you have the perfect balance of challenge and skill. Now, why is this so important? Well, if we have a challenge that is too high, so something that is too difficult in terms of the task, and our skill in that is too low, then what'll end up happening is that we just find it too hard because it's so challenging and we're not good enough at it. Likewise, if we are too skilled at it, but the challenge itself is not hard enough, then we just get bored because of the fact that it's too easy. And so one of the most important parts of entering flow is making sure that you have this proper balance between challenge and skill. And one of the best ways to guarantee this balance is by tracking your progress, because tracking your progress allows you to get immediate feedback on what you're doing. For example, I'm an author, and when I was writing my book, I used the word count on the page as a great way to measure how much progress I was making. Now, I didn't just set this as a clear, specific goal of hit 5,000 words this day or hit 1,000 words within the next 3 hours. I didn't set it so much like that because that, again, makes an unbalanced matchup between skill and challenge. Maybe one day if I'm feeling up to it, I could write way more than I expected to, but I wouldn't have that same level of challenge to match that level of skill because my goal was set too low. And likewise, if I set my goal up too high, then we're also going to have a mismatch of challenge and skill. And so one of the ways that this immediate feedback can help you get into a flow state is by helping you readjust the level of challenge based on your level of skill. We all have our good days and our bad days. And on our good days, we can make things more challenging for ourselves to have that proper balance. We can set a higher goal for ourselves so that the challenge is high when the skill is high, and so we have an optimal state of flow. Likewise, if you're not really feeling up to the task that day, you can always just lower your expectations, and that way, even if your skill is fairly low that day, you have a low level of challenge to balance it out. And so this immediate feedback system with tracking your progress allows you to perfectly navigate this sort of golden zone of flow by constantly balancing the level of challenge based on your level of skill that day. And the final technique that I want to share with you guys today on how you can level up your ability to get into a flow state is something called flow rituals. Now, just to be very honest, I really haven't tried much of this myself. I'm still experimenting and learning more about these flow rituals, but the anecdotal experiences of others who have tried this is very strong, and I believe that this could have a profound impact on the way that you experience flow in your day-to-day life. So the way a flow ritual works is essentially a flow ritual is a series of activities that you perform right before you engage in a bout of flow. So for example, you could have a ritual where you go for a walk or maybe meditate or do breath work for a couple minutes before you sit down to work. The idea is not so much the activities themselves, but more so the idea of associating this flow ritual with the work itself. When you constantly do the same ritual, just like how basketball shooters have their free throw ritual, it's not so much that the ritual itself actually helps them score more points, it's just the psychological connection between the ritual and the actual flow. When you continuously do these rituals right before you enter into flow, your brain starts to associate the flow ritual with flow state. And so even if you're not, feeling super mentally competent, even if maybe you slack off on some of the other things that you need to do to get into a flow state, as long as you do this flow ritual, you will have a stronger capability of getting into flow state because your brain already has this psychological association between the flow state and the flow ritual itself. Now, some ideas for the activities that you could do within this flow ritual are, first of all, something that's psychologically calming you down. So it could be, taking some deep breaths, maybe listening to your favorite song like we talked about earlier. It could be, walking around just to clear your mind, maybe jotting down all your thoughts in a journal before you get down to work, so that way you're not distracted when you work. Or it could also be something functional. So, for example, using the bathroom right before you go to work so that you don't have to interrupt your flow session. Maybe getting a big drink of water and putting it right on your desk so you don't have to get up. Or caffeinating so that you have more energy. It could also be gathering any supplies or materials. Maybe if you know that you're going to be recording a video, it's setting up your recording studio in a very specific way every single time. Again, that also serves as a ritual. The possibilities are really endless when it comes to flow rituals. You have so much room to experiment with different kinds of flow rituals to see which one fits you best. But just start to think about some ideas of what you might want to include in your flow ritual, what helps you to mentally calm down, or maybe to mentally stimulate yourself, make yourself more energetic and excited for your work. Anything that you feel like you would need in your flow ritual, you can start experimenting with literally today or tomorrow. It's completely free and easy to do, and I believe it really could help you get into a flow state more easily. The main thing is to not change it around too much because, again, we want to have that psychological association over time. And so, sure, experimenting in the beginning is fine, but once you have a flow ritual that you feel like is good enough, just lock that in and stick with that all the time. You shouldn't change it around too much because, again, the goal is to have one set ritual that you can just activate at any time and that will immediately prompt your brain to get into a greater state of flow. Try not to switch it around too much because, again, the goal is to have one ritual that you can always revert back to anytime you feel like you're struggling to get into flow. And in fact, any times when you feel like you could get into flow easily. The goal is to have one ritual that you can just set before work every single time you enter a work block to prepare your brain for flow, whether that be psychologically, functionally, or just the fact that you're even engaging in this ritual in the first place. Because of that association with the ritual and flow, you will feel more prepared to enter flow. So you already know how to enter flow in the moment when you're actually performing your work. But what about structuring your entire day around flow blocks? This is one of the most powerful productivity tactics because it changes the way you work throughout your day. Instead of just having a ritual here or there, you have a clear structure for your day that single-handedly changes the way you work and your ability to get into a flow state. So the first principle that I want you to implement when structuring your routine is making sure that each work block has enough time in it. Because again, just like a plane on the runway, it takes time to get into flow. And we don't want to just get into flow and then immediately have to cut off our work block for an extra meeting or a lunch break or something like that. We want to have stretches of ideally 1 to 2 hours, maybe even more than 2 hours, where we can just sit and focus so that we give ourselves, number one, enough time to get into flow, but also number two, once we get into flow, enough time to actually reap the benefits of flow. We don't want to enter flow and then immediately interrupt it. So try to schedule your day around this principle. Make sure that whenever you do have blocks where you're just working by yourself, no distractions, just deep focused work, that these blocks are long enough to actually get you into a flow state and maintain you there for long enough. For example, let's say if on Friday you have a bunch of meetings and appointments that you have to attend, try to schedule all of those together in sort of a cluster so that you have all of those within the span of just a few hours and the rest of the day is open for you to schedule these long blocks. That would be so much more conducive to flow than you, say, having maybe an hour of work time and then that gets interrupted by a meeting and then another hour and then a meeting and then another hour and then a meeting. That is much less conducive to flow because, again, as soon as you get into flow, you're probably going to be interrupted. It takes time to get into flow. And so we do not want to land our plane before it is time that we actually get to our destination. We want to make sure that we get to our destination first and then we land our plane. So don't have these interruptions. Try to schedule all of your meetings, all of your appointments, any interruptions that would normally be a distraction in your workday, all at the same time of the day, so that the rest of the day is open for you to just have this time to yourself where you can schedule these long bouts of flow. Now, the next tactic when it comes to structuring your schedule around flow is something I like to call flow chaining. And I believe this is one of the most powerful productivity tactics you can use, along with ETFF. I believe if you use ETFF with flow chaining, you are going to be on your way to insane levels of productivity. So there's this big debate in the productivity space about the optimal way to take breaks. Some people believe that you should take short breaks that are highly frequent. So for example, advocates of the Pomodoro technique suggest working for only 25 minutes at a time and then having a short 5-minute break and then repeating that cycle over and over and over again. Whereas other people believe that breaks are usually more of a distraction than an actual good, and that you should try to minimize your use of breaks, because the moment you get into a break, you start to distract yourself and you lose that momentum of the work. However, there's also the case that breaks really help you to refresh your mind. If you're constantly working on the same task for 12 hours a day, you will start to feel mentally tired, and breaks help you refresh and rejuvenate your mind. And I believe that flow chaining is the perfect middle ground between the benefits of breaks and the benefits of uninterrupted work. Basically, the way that flow chaining works is that you complete a certain task and you work on it until completion. And then as soon as you complete that task, you move on to another task immediately. So flow chaining is when you have a series of tasks that you want to complete. And the way it works is that you work on a task until completion. And as soon as you complete that task, you immediately move on to working the next task until completion. And you just keep continuing this over and over and over, knocking off each task one by one. So the reason this works so well is, number one, it keeps you in the momentum of working. You don't get distracted, you don't suddenly get tired from your breaks because you're not actually taking any breaks. You're basically staying at your desk all day until you get your work done. Now, granted, staying at your desk all day is not very healthy, but the idea is that we want to get all of our work done, and then we have this break or this prolonged period of fun, rather than work and then break and then work and then break, right? We don't want to have work interspersed with breaks, because again, that detracts from flow. However, it also keeps your mind fresh, so it has the benefit of breaks because you are switching tasks. As soon as you complete one task, you move on to another task that is entirely different and unique, and it uses different parts of the brain so that you're no longer feeling that same tired, lethargic feeling that you would feel if, say, you're working on the same task for 12 hours a day. For example, let's say I have to make slideshow presentations, I have to take a practice test, and I also have to write a journalism article, okay? So I would first figure out which one is the most mentally demanding. Let's say it's the slideshow presentations, and I would put that first because, again, eat the frog. So I do the slideshow presentations. I'm working at my desk. As soon as I finish the slideshow presentations, I immediately move on to the practice test. If I wanted to, I literally could have the tab already pulled up in my browser. So all I have to do is just enter that tab, and I'm already working on that practice test. The main thing here is no breaks, so that you can keep the momentum of you being at your desk and working. Then, as soon as I finish that practice test, I immediately move on to writing the journalism article. So do you see how this works? We're essentially maintaining the momentum of working. However, because again, we're switching tasks, we're not also being tired from the same task. We are keeping things fresh and we're switching it up so that we don't get this sort of lethargic feeling when we're just sitting at our desk working on the same thing. And so flow chaining is this extremely powerful technique where you can stay in a flow state for such a prolonged period of time. Because again, if you've already accelerated on the runway, it's so much easier to get into the air than if you start from a standing still place. So once you've stopped doing your flow state activity first, so for example, the very first activity was presentations, as soon as I finish that, because I'm already in the momentum of flow, I'm going to be so much more likely to enter a flow state when it comes to the next activity, which would be the practice test, much more easily. Because I already had the flow, I can then carry that on to the next activity and the next and the next and the next. And again, we avoid this trap of feeling lethargic and tired because we're keeping it fresh by switching up the tasks. Now, one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, Otis, what if my tasks don't actually fit into the flow chaining model? What if I have a task that's way too long, for example, and I have a whole flow state bout, but I'm still not done with the task, and so I'm just left there feeling bored and tired, and I'm just sitting there, and I can't quite switch my task yet, so I can't do the flow chaining thing. I just have to sit there with the same task. Should I take a break? What should I do? To that, I would say, lower your bar for what the completion of the task is. For example, I wrote a book, right? Some might say completion of the task would be writing the book. But I'm not going to write the whole book in one flow state bout. I'm not going to write the whole book in one day, right? So in that case, I would say have a specific goal for what your flow state bout is meant to achieve. When I say completion of the task, I do not mean full completion of whatever task it is that you aspire to achieve in the future. I do not mean write a whole book in a flow state bout. I mean set a clear goal for yourself. It could be writing one chapter. It could be editing 2 chapters. It could be anything. Just have one specific goal and you work until the completion of that goal. So if you find that your flow state bouts are too short and you're not actually able to complete the task within that time, then I would say lower the bar, make your goal a little bit easier to achieve so that you do achieve it in time. And the second question that I get asked is the opposite. What if my task is so short that I can't even get into a flow state bout in the first place because the moment I do, the task is already over? And to that, I recommend a technique called intensity sprinting. Basically, the way intensity sprinting works is you set a little timer for yourself as soon as you begin the task. So have a little challenge for yourself. If, for example, I used to do this a lot with my history notes, if I know that I can complete a section of history notes in maybe 20 minutes, I'm going to set a timer for 17 minutes. 16 minutes, 15 minutes. I'm going to set it so challenging that I can just barely beat it if I am maximally focused and maximally productive. If I even just glance away for a little bit or, just think and ruminate about the day and wander off, if I do any of that, I'm not making it in time. It should be a race against the clock. That is why it's not just, time sprinting, it's intensity sprinting. You need to work with such blistering intensity that you complete the task in an amount of time that you normally wouldn't have thought is possible. This way, these short tasks genuinely feel short instead of taking up random large amounts of time. They feel so short because you can get them done in such a short amount of time because of this intensity. I actually find this technique really fun, almost like a game where I'm trying to race against myself to see how fast I can complete this task. And the most important part of this game or this challenge, whatever you'd like to call it, is to have a specific punishment or a challenge or a task to do at the end if you fail to complete the task within that time. So for example, with the history notes, I was doing push-ups if I didn't make it in time. So I would be working, and let's say I just completed it in time, then I would be saved from the push-ups. But let's say I set a timer for 20 minutes and it takes me 22 minutes. Well, as soon as that 20-minute timer rings, I'm not going to drop down and do push-ups straight away because, again, I'm in that focused momentum. So I'm going to finish my history notes. As soon as I finish that task that I said I was going to do in 20 minutes, I drop down, I do 5, 10 push-ups, however many, and then I get straight back to work. The important thing with this challenge is, number 1, it should be realistically achievable, so you actually do it. Number 2, it shouldn't be something crazy that disrupts your work focus because, again, we want to maintain that momentum just like the plane on the runway. So, doing a couple push-ups is fine because you can do push-ups anywhere. But if it was like going out for a run, that's really disruptive to your focus because, again, you have to go out, put on your shoes, and then wear your running clothes, go out for the run, come back inside, sit back down at your desk, and then you get back to work. So have some sort of a challenge for yourself with these short bouts of blistering intensity, and I think that could really help you with these shorter tasks. I actually find this to be way more fun than entering into a flow state just because of that extra element of challenge. With a flow state, it's a little bit more open-ended because we don't want to rush flow, right? Flow is that kind of process where it just kind of happens naturally. But with this, I get to sort of race and set a challenge. So it's a really fun technique, and I have made so much progress in my ability to get work done faster using this technique. I went from having 25 or 30-minute timers to getting all the way down to like 17, 18-minute timers for my history notes, all within the span of like a week. So I highly recommend trying out that technique. So what does an optimal day of productivity look like? How do we actually structure all of this together? So you wake up, you do your cold shower, flow rituals, ETFF, and you get straight to work on your Eat the Frog task, fasted of course. And then you immediately go into the next task and the next task and the next task into this flow chaining state. I would say you're better off doing your flow chaining at the beginning of the day because those flow tasks are harder. And then those short intensity sprint tasks you can schedule for later on in the day after your flow chaining because those are generally less mentally demanding. And you're better off doing the more mentally demanding stuff first because, again, we want to keep in mind that eat the frog principle. And I understand this can be really hard, with the cold showers and the flow rituals and eat the frog and fasting and flow chaining and intensity sprints. There's so much, right? I would say just try to take 1 to 2 things away from this video. You can pause and skip back and forth to see what kind of things you were interested in, what kind of things you really feel like could help you. Just take 1 to 2 things away from this video and try to implement them literally tomorrow. Okay, figure out how you can make this work with your schedule. Figure out maybe you need to wake up earlier, maybe you don't need to wake up early and you have been. Anything like that, figure out what you're going to do tomorrow and just try to take away 1 to 2 things from this video. And I promise you, even though the ideal day of productivity may be far away from you for now, just by making these small changes one at a time, you will find that your productivity boosts so much. And genuinely, with willpower and addiction and discipline and dopamine, these kinds of things are slow changes, right? We see the changes over months and years of doing hard work. I promise you with these focus changes, it's genuinely a matter of days. Like within 1 to 2 days of implementing these techniques, you will feel it because the instant feedback is so immediate. From taking a cold shower, it's not like you need to take cold showers for years until you can have that hit of endorphins and energy. You get it the moment you step into that shower. Same thing goes with Eat the Frog Fasted. All of these techniques can be done literally tomorrow, and you will see results literally tomorrow. So just try to take away 1 to 2 things from this video and see if those can help you. And by improving your productivity and your ability to focus on your work, you'll be able to achieve all of those goals that you had set for yourself in the future. All of those dreams that seemed distant once now are within reach for you. And most importantly, you don't have to sacrifice your entire day to do it. You still get to spend time with your loved ones, with your relatives, with your family, friends, with having that time for yourself to enjoy and relax because you're not so inefficient anymore. You are so blisteringly efficient with this insane level of work intensity that you are able to just sit down and get all the work done and have all the rest of that time in the day for yourself. You'll no longer suffer the pain of being the person who sits down at their desk, stares at their computer monitor for 8 hours a day, thinking that they're doing work, but really you barely get anything done, and then feeling the pain of that afterwards when you go back home, or even if you work from home, just when you go to bed that night and think, I really accomplished nothing. I achieved nothing today. I spent so long, I felt like I tried hard, but I did nothing. The world didn't change at all. I accomplished nothing with my work. That is such a terrible feeling to have. And once you begin to focus on these techniques, once you begin to improve your ability to focus on your work, you will no longer feel this way because every single hour, every single minute that you spend on your work will be so much more efficient than those hours that you spent earlier. You will be able to focus on your work and actually get work done so that when you go to bed that night, you feel happy and you feel proud of yourself. Everyone around me at school always asks, dude, like, what time do you go to bed? And I always say 8:30. And any time that I say 8:30, they always just go like, huh? Because to be honest, I have like fairly high grades for, compared to the average at my school. I usually get all A's in all my classes, and I'm just, an excellent student. I'm an author, etc. Not trying to brag, but I'm just trying to get the point across. I still go to bed at 8:30 every night. I know people who study way harder than me or way longer than me. They stay up way later than me, and I still end up scoring higher than them. Again, it's not about who works for longer, it's about who works the most efficiently. And I believe that you too, after watching this video and applying the techniques that I discuss in it, can achieve that same level of focus and productivity. That's all for the video, and I wish you well in the future. By the way, there's a few links underneath this video that you can check out if you want to have a look at my paid products. When you trust me enough and you feel like my free content has already changed your life, you can have a look at those.